Welcome to the Nourish Soul podcast, where we talk about all things nourishing to the body, mind, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Kelli Ritter, and I have a particular interest in sharing a fresh perspective on mental health. So if you are enjoying this show, we would love to hear from you. So you can rate the show or leave us comments or just give us some feedback. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy the next episode. I want to talk about mitochondrial health and why this is so important for us to understand when we're trying to restore health or wholeness, because I believe that any healing that we do is a restoring of our wholeness. And this process, it's a process, right? So I want to talk about why the mitochondria and why it's so important to understand mitochondrial health for the whole picture. But then I also want to talk about a couple of things, and I'm going to try and do it in a very practical way. It's always about the emotions, right? I want to talk about how we, even if we're doing all the things that we need to do to restore our mitochondrial health or have really healthy functioning mitochondria, as opposed to like mutant dysfunctional mitochondria, even when we're doing all the things to really restore our voltage, literally restoring our charge inside of our cells so that we're feeling really vibrant and more vitality. Even when we're doing all that, it doesn't mean that we don't have to address the emotional parts or the parts of ourselves that we have shut off or have been frozen. It's like frozen light inside the biofield. That sounds a little bit woo, but these frozen, where we have shut off emotions or shut off parts of ourselves because of stressors or traumas or whatever might have happened, we shut that off, or it's been relegated to the unconscious. And so it's really about a process of bringing that back into harmony, of it's returning to ourselves. And that is all, that's spiritual, that's emotional, that's mental, that's physical. So it's a combination of all of those things. So first, let's talk a little bit about mitochondria, because I don't think we can hear this enough until it really starts to sink in. And when you start to be able to repeat what I'm about to say without me saying it, and you really understand mitochondria, then you've got it. I have just recorded a new version of my free webinar. So I had a free class on mood and mitochondria. I've had several classes on, mitochondria 101 and those kinds of things, but I re-recorded the mood and mitochondria webinar. And so right now you can still get the replay. Hopefully it will be all done and ready and you can get that free access to that. So that's something you might want to check out. I also have a free quiz on my website, and you can get all this stuff. I have links to it, but you can go to my website and I have a free quiz on mood and mitochondria. And is your mitochondrial health influencing your mood? So you can do all that. It's best to just start with the free stuff. And then when you get to a place where you're like, you really want to dig into your own healing and your own health and your own mitochondria, just go a little bit deeper, then you might want to take one of the courses. But for now, let's just kind of keep it high level. And let me just tell you why it's so important for you to understand this about mitochondria. So, our mitochondria are these little organelles that are inside of our cells. And we all learned that they're the powerhouse of the cell, but that they do much, much more than that. And these little organelles, they move electrons through the body. They're the electron transport chain is housed in these little organelles, these little mitochondria. And so we can actually have hundreds, 1,000, you can have a million in per cell inside of your brain. So where we find the most mitochondria per cell is going to be in the human egg. But aside from the human egg, it takes a lot of energy to make a human being. So that makes sense, right? In a human egg, we're going to find lots of mitochondria. But then the next spot is in the brain. And so it makes sense to me that when we have a lot of mental health issues or health issues in general, you've already got a lot of inflammation in the brain due to dysfunctional mitochondria. So we know now, we have a lot of research to really support the fact that all of the mental health disorders are related to not only inflammation, but also metabolic dysfunction. So it's that, which is great news, right? Because a lot of us are like, oh, it's just genetic. This is the way I am. Their anxiety runs in my family, or this runs in my family, or that. Yes, but we know much more about epigenetics now. And we have all of this great information on metabolic health and even our microbiome, which I'm not even talking about that, and inflammation. And that's something we can work on. We can heal. We can fix these issues, which is extremely exciting. But the mitochondria, healthy mitochondria drive health. And dysfunctional mitochondria, or mutant mitochondria as it's sometimes called, drive dysfunction. They drive disease. And they drive disease through inflammation. So when our mitochondria are not, they don't have the right inputs, they're dysfunctional. We get our mitochondria from our mothers. There is some newer research that shows that our fathers do have a part to play, but with the majority of the research that is compelling, at least at this point, is showing Dr. Doug Wallace's work, by the way, is showing that we inherit our mitochondria from our mothers. But however we get mitochondria, and then it might not be really functioning mitochondria because we can function without symptoms up to 70% dysfunctional mitochondria or mutant mitochondria. So a lot of people will say, how would I know? Well, if you've got symptoms, then you can pretty much guarantee that your mitochondria are weak or need help. But what's really important about this is not only the inflammation, but it leads to cellular dehydration, which leads to low voltage. And a lot of our issues and a lot of our symptoms can be traced back to this cellular danger signaling, this inflammation that's coming from lost electrons in the electron transport chain with dysfunctional or swollen mitochondria, and we're not able to make enough of the energy and the water, the special water that is made inside of our bodies. And that water is then structured. And that structured water, which is often called easy or exclusion zone water, and that's the work of Gerald Pollack, Dr. Jerry Pollack. He's the one that figured out that this water inside of us actually acts like a battery. And so the more we have, the more hydrated cellularly we are, the more voltage we have. And we want our cells, we run best on a negative charge. These electrons are negatively charged. Well, guess what? Easy water is full of electrons. So it's really important to start putting the pieces together so that you're understanding that a lot of what your health issues are being driven by these small, teeny tiny processes inside the body, these subatomic particles or waves, depending on that's a whole nother thing. That's the whole quantum realm. But I'm trying to keep this kind of high level and just let you understand that the mitochondria need certain inputs. And when they don't have the right inputs, or when we are depleting and draining our body, then we're going to end up with symptoms. We're going to end up with inflammation. We're also going to end up with more metabolic problems, and we're going to be cellularly dehydrated. And this is all leading to cells that are sending danger signaling. And what we want is more safety signaling, cellular hydration. We want our mitochondria to be healthy so that we are moving those electrons through the electron transport chain, and our cells are negatively charged with the electrons that they need. So, electrons are kind of like money in the bank. You've probably heard me say this, but I'm going to say it again. It's like money in the bank. So if the body's the bank, then you can think of electrons, and having more electrons is like money in the bank, really helpful for us. So the mitochondria, not only do they make ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is our source of energy, but they also move the electrons and they make water. And that water then gets structured and is like a battery inside of us. So, really, it's helpful if you start to understand that we are electrical beings first. We have these electrical communication throughout the body. And when we have the right inputs, meaning we have electrons And how do we get that? I'll tell you in a second. We have sunlight. These electrons, I mean, our mitochondria, excuse me, our mitochondria need electrons, they need sunlight, and they need oxygen. So they're really good at sensing the environment. But when we live our lives indoors, they can be very confused because obviously they are inside of our cells. And so they need the right inputs in order to be able to orient. And a lot of that, the damage that gets done is the lifestyles that we have now. Our food, we're eating things out of packages, doesn't make any sense to our body. That not only is it not nutrient dense, but it's also, it doesn't have the right information for our body because food is light and light has information for our body. Food also can have electrons, so that's part of what, but we can get electrons by Earth. So any of our skin, bare skin touching Earth's surface, we absorb free electrons that way. So there are lots of ways for us to help our mitochondria out, and they all involve being in harmony with your natural environment. Orienting the body, getting enough sunlight exposure, real light exposure. Now, most people will think, oh, it needs to be a sunny day in the middle of summer. No, no, no. It doesn't have to be that. It just needs to be the light from outside. So it can be cloudy and snowy and rainy, and we're still getting the light frequencies. But when we live our lives indoors, eating packaged foods and processed crap, it's not just that the processed crap food isn't nutrient dense. That is a big problem. And but it's also because it's disorienting to, on a cellular level, it's disorienting to your mitochondria. Okay. So, really what I want I wanna stay really focused on the fact that what I'm trying to tell you is that at if you are trying to live your life with optimal wellness and vitality, this is a piece of the puzzle that you're going to want to pay attention to and figure out, and make sure that your body has the right inputs. Most of my work now with people who are chronically stressed and anxious, and most of the people that I work with have done a lot of things to try and heal, and a lot of it has been somewhat helpful. They are able to manage their symptoms pretty well, but they're still experiencing chronic anxiety. I have now I'm really starting to put the pieces together that we can do a lot. I was doing a lot with traditional, I'm trained in traditional psychotherapy, meditation, exercise, the diet. So we were doing a lot with nutrition because a lot of the people who come to me they want to heal their guts. They know that their gut needs a little bit of work. And most people that have chronic anxiety also have digestive issues. So we're working hand in hand with that. And we can have a lot of healing that happens with that. What was missing is this understanding on a cellular level, the danger signaling that's happening, and how to repair things and increase voltage, increase the negative net charge in your cells, increasing this easy water, exclusion zone water, the battery that is your body, understanding all of that. And I've become really, really excited about the fact that not only are we light, but inside of our cells, our mitochondria make light. They so literally, I used to think of this as more of a spiritual, oh, we're light, and but that literally you make light inside of your cells. Infrared, which is part of the spectrum that we can't see. So the light, all the light that we can see is important, but also the light we cannot see is important inside the body. And the light outside the body influences the light inside the body. So that's why I'm always talking about and having people on the show that talk about how to get your light environment right, because that's going to be very important in your own healing journey. And a lot of what is wrong with us these days, all of the symptoms we have, I don't care if it's like chronic sinus stuff or headaches or digestive issues or thyroid problems or what I work with stress, chronic stress and anxiety and mood issues. All of these issues are come right back to the cellular health or dysfunction and the biofield. So, inside of we all have a biofield that is now that science is is clear. It's not even a controversial subject anymore. We all have this electromagnetic field in and around us. And any of the work that you've seen, like Dr. Bush is talking about this, lots of different people are talking about how we are constantly organizing. That's really how we are, is organizing based on this electromagnetic field. Our cells are organizing that way based on this electromagnetic field. And what can happen with trauma and stressors that we've had in our lives, it could be adverse of childhood experiences, it could be what some people think of as not even that big of a deal, like a milder stress, but what can happen over time is we're repressing, if we are repressing those things, and we're losing pieces of ourselves. We are relegating those parts of ourselves to the unconscious or shoving it down. I think of it as shoving down, but it's really like a cutting off of part of who you are. If we have done a lot of that, we are walking around low voltage and without that wholeness of our biofield. So, any healing that we do toward like increasing our voltage, all of that's very helpful, increasing that exclusion zone water, which is increasing our charge. All of those things are going to be really important. And that's all about harmonizing with our natural environment. But we're also going to need the harmony, the parts of ourselves that we have cut off, that we have shoved away, or we have relegated to our unconscious need to be brought into harmony as well. So I'm just going to give you an example. I had some pain in my left hip, like just some stiffness in my left hip. And the left side of the body, is, from an electromagnetic standpoint, is often related to disappointment and can be related to some fears. And the right side of the body is overdoing often. If there are pains and aches and pains going on in the right side, it's that we're overdoing. Whereas on the left side, it can be more related to fears and disappointments. So anyway, I was like, okay, yeah, so I understand I'm working with that. But I also want this stiffness to stop hurting, right? So for a few weeks even, I think I didn't have my grounding sheets. I use grounding sheets on the bed. And I can't remember what happened or why we didn't have the grounding sheet on the bed, but we didn't. And so my left hip started hurting more. And so I put the grounding sheet back on. Great. Left hip is now not hurting. So does that mean we're done? Like, so we can stop having symptoms or we can reduce the symptoms by utilizing the quantum health strategies like earthing, being in sunrise, getting sunlight throughout the day, making sure you're blocking the blue light at night. All of these strategies that we have. Also, nutrient dense foods, making sure that you're eating seasonal, local. I'm all about an animal based diet, all the things. If you're doing all of that can reduce the symptoms and it's fantastic. Like my hip just wasn't hurting that much. But does that mean that I don't need to deal with the disappointment or fears? Because my thinking is no, that doesn't mean that. It means it's going to show up in other ways, which it has. I have been really noticing a great deal of irritation, like just being irritated by things that are not that big of a deal, like trying to get the harness on the dog and he kept stepping out of it instead of stepping in it. And it was really frustrating me. And I don't mean like kind of frustrating, I mean like really upsetting. And so I see this over and over again with clients too. When you're overly upset about things, when you overreact to these things that are just kind of irritating or not even that big of a deal, that's a sign, right? So even if you're doing all the things and you've gotten some symptoms to be under control, right? You've gotten the symptoms under control or non-existent even, and you think, "Oh, that's great." I'm telling you, if there is more emotional stuff that is stuck or old traumas and things like that, especially when you're really healing and really working on yourself and you're building this new foundation of health and healing, other stuff is gonna bubble up. It's gonna come to the surface to be healed. It's not to go backwards and go, "Oh no, all this stuff is bringing up pain that I don't want to deal with, or emotions that I don't want to deal with, old stuff that I don't want to talk about." This is not the time to retreat and go backwards. This is the time to continue the healing, but to make sure that you have the supports that you need because most people will go back to old patterns here. They'll go back to doing things the way that they used to be doing them, and that is not helpful, generally not helpful. And if you go back to the ways of shoving things down, shoving the feelings down, or regulating these parts of yourself to the unconscious, they will find their way bubbling back up in symptoms, and you will start to experience symptoms again. And you'll be very frustrated because you'll think, I already had this figured out, and now these symptoms are back. So if you have nagging symptoms, this is the place to look. Yeah, not always really fun work, but really important work. Okay, so well, you're absolutely going to want to work on making sure that your mitochondria have what they need so that you have this higher voltage so that you can actually be energized and have your battery that is your body fully charged. That's not the end of the work, right? How do we do that? How do we make sure that we're not relegating parts of ourselves? How do we even know that that's happening? Well, if you continue to have symptoms, that's one of the one of the ways to notice that. But as you start to feel better and better, and as you start to increase the safety signals to your nervous system and to your body on a cellular level, and as the inflammation decreases and you're working on your metabolic health, you've got this new foundational health that is in place. Then as things start to, you will know that as things start to bubble up, that that is not a sign that something is wrong or that you're going backwards. It's actually a sign that you're moving forwards and to keep going with that. And the way that I think about that, there's so many ways to heal. You could do body work here. You could have a good therapist. You could have a great life coach, health coach. There are a lot of ways to heal. We generally need some kind of support. So if you have a support system in place, that's fantastic. If you don't, this is a good time to try and figure out how you're going to do that, how you're going to be supported as the stuff starts to bubble up. One of the fears that people will often have is that their anxiety, if they already have anxiety, is going to get worse. It is going to be debilitating, sometimes even with mood in general, like depression, and that it'll get to be too much, or that they'll be having emotional outbursts in public situations. You might, but you have to also understand that as you're healing, this is how the healing happens, is it's going to come out. And so you want to have places and safety to be able to do that. And the first order of business is safety and stability. And I would add trust. So making sure that you feel safe and stable to do that. And then there's a learning and a there What else can take like the healing that can take place then? Once there's safety and stability, then the learning, and there's a lot of learning that can happen and a lot of healing that can happen. And that's where you want to have a container, because the transformation that's going to happen, so safety and stability help kind of create that container. But to have the resources, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I don't have the resources or the funds to do that. It doesn't always mean you have to have funds, but you do need to have support so that you in a container and move at your own pace. Because if you move too quickly, if you don't actually have the base down and the foundation, and I would call that, earthing all of the pieces of the quantum health that strategies, if you don't have that foundationally down, because you want these grounding vibrations, like the grounding frequencies. You want to be grounded, because if you start doing a lot of the emotional work and the spiritual work, you can it feels like you're losing yourself. It's that much freedom and expansion can be very disorienting. So, you also want to be very grounded and have very practical ways that you're helping yourself and people and places and things that feel like safety and stability for you, so that you can then have a container for the learning and the healing and the transformation. Because if you think about like a butterfly, if you think about a butterfly, if the butterfly were to if the caterpillar were to try to become a butterfly without the cocoon, it's not possible, because the caterpillar literally liquefies in order to become the butterfly. So you can think about that transformation in human beings too, and what's happening inside of your heart, and the coherence between the heart and the brain, and what's happening with the quantum communication throughout the body. You need to have that safety and stability in place so that you can do that transforming. And then the transformation is really more about harmonizing and bringing old parts that have been shoved away back into the fold, back into harmony with the whole. And there's a reintegration phase. So that's really trauma work in general. They're, looking at the three phases of safety and stability. And then the healing that can happen. I also include learning, because I don't think a lot of the deep learning, you've got to have the safety and stability first. So then the learning and the healing. And then there's this reintroduction and integration phase too, where you've done all this healing, but now you have to also continue to be in social situations, and you're doing the social situations the whole time, but there's a different you just come at things from a very different perspective when you've done all this healing. And what I want to just encourage you to do is not stop once you have the momentum, just because you're seeing symptoms, or because you're becoming more emotional, or you're seeing things bubble up. That's not the time to actually go into retreating backwards and doing old behaviors. It's actually a sign that you are actually moving towards healing, that there's learning and healing happening. And it can happen pretty quickly too. It's not like we're talking about years and years and years. It is a process, but sometimes healing is very quick. And if you have the safety and stability and trust, you can move through healing pretty quickly and move into the integration and reintegration phase pretty quickly. So it's not always that it's going to be really long and drawn out. I think that's as much as I wanted to share today. Really trying to drive home the importance of the foundation to make sure that you actually have the voltage to be able to do the healing, but then also bringing back up the fact that the emotional part has to be addressed too. And I would include the traumas and the stressors and the things that get shoved down, and along with the emotions. And I was talking to my friend Erin, who's here, who's visiting. We were talking about a lot of really incredibly deep things, and how When you are in service of love, and when you want love, we were talking about how Joe Dispenza was just talking about this too, that if you want love, then anything inside of you that isn't love has to die. And it can be very uncomfortable. And so to be able to be with uncertainty and discomfort in the process of healing, and in my opinion, when your body is giving you symptoms, it's already moved into a healing phase. So you want to support it as much as possible rather than just trying to get rid of the symptoms. We actually want to support the body. But if you're not looking at some of the original root causes and the parts of yourself that you are cutting off or have been cut off, then you're missing a piece of the healing. Yeah. But this idea of being in service to something much larger than us and love, I I would call it love. No, love is the only thing that's real. So in service to love can often feel very hard and challenging, and in some cases, she's brutal. Love is brutal. She will strip you of anything that isn't love. If you say yes to love, this is the path. And that is not always what people think it's gonna be. I mean, I think most people would, if you said, "Do you want freedom and vitality and a path of love?" And if do you want more vitality, love, and freedom in your life? People would raise their hands and say, "Yes, absolutely," not realizing how brutal that journey can be. Beautiful, amazing, and also can be challenging and hard and messy. So, I was gonna say, I think it's worth it, but I think that everyone has to decide for themselves if it's a path you want. If this is if this is what you want, then you wanna make sure you have the foundation, and there are very uncomfortable, uncertain things that happen as stuff starts to come up to be healed, and that's part of the journey. So I'm wishing you the best on your journey, of course, and I'm hoping that you will check out some of the free resources that we have and start learning more about your mitochondria and how important that is to the whole piece. And then get the support that you need and wherever you are in the journey for your own healing. Have a wonderful week, everybody, and I will see you next week or Hey, thanks for tuning in to this episode. Just want to remind you that we would love to hear your feedback, and it really helps the show if you rate the show and leave comments. I also want to just let you know that I am doing free classes. So I've been doing those every other month. They're usually related to mood and quantum health. So I have done one, and you can watch the replays of the ones that I've already done, and all of that is free. So I did several. I have a food mood talk that I did, and I have mood and mitochondria. So we're talking all about what mood has to do with healthy mitochondria. And the next one that's coming up, July 19th, is going to be on circadian timing. So really fixing your life to help support your circadian rhythms and how those of us in the northern hemisphere can utilize summertime to prepare for winter. So if you're somebody who has a lot of mood issues that come along in the winter, if you have seasonal affective disorder or something similar to that, whether it's got a label or not, you just know that you start to feel a lot moodier, a lot more depressed, or even anxious in different seasons. I want to talk to you about circadian rhythms. So that's a free class, and I would love to have you join that. You can come to my website, nourish-soul.com, and go to events and look for live classes and register for that class. I'd love to have you there. And if there are other classes that you're more interested in, you can watch those replays. And I hope that that is helpful to you. That's the whole point of all that we do, is to be helpful to you. Have a great week.